versus what they're willing to accept and perceive as realistic. I think one young farmer that I spoke with recently, she discussed her leasing situation, and she was fully aware that it wasn't ideal when she entered into it. She was fully aware that it isn't ideal currently, and she's looking for something else in a way to access a more secure land access agreement, whether it's through shared model or owning land in the future. But what she said is that she can't afford to buy land, but she wants to farm now, and she can't wait forever. And waiting around is not going to increase her get her on the land. And so I think that is also, again, a big reason why there's an emergence in these alternative models, many of which are unstable, is that farmers want to farm now, and they're going to go out and do it, and they've come up with these sort of creative entry points into farming through these access arrangements. And I think this is great, and it's something we're sort of encouraging people to actually get out there and get on the land and do this. But over the long term, I think there is a need to look at long-term secure access and how we can facilitate that when we're talking about alternative arrangements, and not just these sort of unstable temporary models. And also not to forget to address root problems and creating the barriers to land access. So when we're supporting farmers through these alternative arrangements, to also be looking at why the issues, the root causes, the cost of land, the speculation, the ALR exclusions, and so also addressing the root causes driving these emergence and issues that young farmers face, not just supporting letting the land keep rising as we support these alternative models. So just some preliminary comments on what I've seen in terms of I think there is a growth in alternative land access, and as I mentioned earlier, there's Stats Canada there's a trend towards increased renting. I also think there's been a trend towards an increase in these alternative models of accessing land. And from what I've seen here, we see there seems to be a big growth in the non-secure and informal arrangements, more so than some of the more formal arrangements, like the community farms or the cooperatives, where there is stability, some sort of built-in stability to the arrangements. There's also a big growth in short-term arrangements for beginning farmers, which is great, like the incubator farms, the apprentices, or short-term leases on public land to get started. But I think that is something that is great and we should continue to support. But then there's a question of where next for those farmers. So after you've done your time on the incubator farm, your short-term lease, 5-year lease, then how do you move on? So it does provide essential training and skills, and you can build your business if you're going to be farming in that area, but they still have to approach the issue of accessing land once again. And just to reiterate, I think there's a need for longer-term protection and access of farmland in BC, and looking to develop those models and putting effort and resources into that direction. And so one model that we've been looking at is farmland trusts. And so continuing research on that, as well as seeking a community input into whether there's a desire and need to have such a provincial farmland trust or larger regional farmland trust, and a trust specific to farmland as opposed to a trust that is going to deal with some farmland. We're interested in having a mandate that is farmland. And so that's sort of one of the directions this research is going is looking into that. And I'm just going to move into some sort of broader recommendations, the Farmland Trust just being one of those. And these recommendations are in, don't include everything, but just to highlight some of them. So for the nonprofit sector, as I said, working on developing a Farmland Trust in conjunction with existing organizations and trusts and government. And along with that is best practices for affirmative agricultural covenants. And so an agricultural covenant or an easement is a legally binding agreement attached to the title of the land. And I'm interested in pursuing these. There's not a lot of them, and for farmers who are interested right now, there's not really organizations that hold these or have a lot of experience in holding affirmative agricultural covenants. There's lots of land trusts that work to do conservation and hold restrictive covenants. So by affirmative, I mean a covenant that would entail that the use of agricultural land must be actively farmed in some way. So it's affirming an activity rather than restricting an activity. And so this is a mechanism that it does require resources, but not the same financial resources that actually physically acquiring the land, owning the land by the land trust organization will require. And there is some expressed interest in this, and I think it just requires a lot of work and development to actually put it into practice. And so, and I wanted, before I start, I want to say that the nonprofits that are doing the work right now are delivering successful programs, and that first and foremost, we should continue to support those programs that are existing. There are lots of programs, and there's not a need for duplication, and I think that we should continue to support many programs that have emerged, like the Community Futures programs in Prince George, Young Agrarians, the BC Young Farmers. So, and a lot of I also asked farmers whether they felt they were sufficiently aware of the programs and resources, and a majority of them said no. And so I think there's lots of resources out there. It's how to get those to farmers is one of the big questions. And I also think there's a need to have increased collaboration between people doing work in different regions of the province, especially between the northern parts of the province and the southern parts of the province, and acknowledging that we have different challenges and that there's potential for collaboration there, especially in terms of sort of garnering the interest that exists in urban areas like Vancouver, and making people aware of the opportunities that exist in the northern parts of the province, and that there is agricultural communities and support mechanisms out there. Growing incubator farms out there would be great, and sort of being able to have that connection between even the diverse programs here and farmers out in other regions to sort of expand outside the Lower Mainland to get people out there. And for the land, I think land linking programs are great, and it's especially important to continue to link the land access agreement resources with that, so farmers can sort of know what they're getting into and have appropriate agreements. And there's also been it's been articulated that there's a need for training cooperative approaches to farming and land access. There's definitely an interest in this, but then a lot of people don't actually know that much about forming a cooperative. And so I think this is a skill that we have the BC Cooperative Association that has been worked with farm folk, city folk to date already, but something we can further foster is how to provide these resources for farmers who are interested in cooperative arrangements so they know how to do it effectively. So a few recommendations for municipal governments, continuing with developing food policies and continuing with the development of official community plans and zoning to protect agricultural land. And one thing that's been raised by the participants I've worked with is the potential for community farm zoning. So I mentioned, housing can be a challenge. There's various challenges when you have groups of people sharing land, especially ALR land, with respect to it can be both municipal or ALR regulations. And so how to create regulations that would be favorable to having sort of increased housing to enable community farms, but also to prevent the negative impacts of such a regulation. And so one suggestion is to develop a community farm zoning that would sort of allow for community farming, but also have the mechanisms to prevent sort of negative impacts of allowing something like increased housing on farmland. And so there's various people who've already worked on that, and I think it's just an element of getting those together and creating a proposal that municipal governments can work. And I think that municipal governments in the Richmond model, where the land is public land is held by the municipality, and it's managed by a nonprofit or by a university as an incubator farm, is a great model, and that it's something that can be put into practice in other regions and municipalities. And so lastly here, for the provincial government, I also want to emphasize that in working on these alternative mechanisms and models and advancing these, it is by no means a replacement of the agricultural land reserve, and I 100% support the agricultural land reserve and the continuity of it and strengthening of that policy. And these alternative models are meant to be in collaboration with the existing policy we have around the agricultural land protection. So again, to continue to strengthen the agricultural land reserve. So in mechanisms for non-ownership, whether this could also be directed towards the financial industry, but a big challenge for farmers who are starting up but don't own land, it can be challenging to get loans because you don't have the land to take that advantage. So creating ways that people can access financing in non-ownership models. And then with respect to the ALR, there's a need to revise the regulations around housing for community farms. And again, as I already said, with the zoning in a way that enables community farms without the negative impacts of housing on land. and the potential for sharing large ALR parcels if there's an increasing interest in small lot agriculture, and doing that with avoiding the problems of subdividing agricultural land. So if people want small lot agriculture in areas where there's only large parcels, how can we do that? How can we create that opportunity while not subdividing and still maintaining the integrity of large agricultural parcels? Another need is support for non-family succession and intergenerational land transfer between non-family members. So there's lots of resources out there for succession and land transfer between family members. When you have community farms or people who want to, outgoing farmers who don't have children to transfer land to, and incoming farmers that they can build relationships with, how can we support that? So that's just a matter of sort of tailoring some of the existing resources to non-family relationships and enabling that process. And another thing that's been mentioned by quite a few people is developing and promoting government cost sharing programs for internships. So for short-term accesses through internships and apprenticeships, having funding for that, so it's just not the backs of farmers and interns who have to work for free. So having more formalized programs. I know that there's some that have been out there, but further promoting that. And then just lastly, finishing up with sort of back to the land trust. We see integration with government as a would be a great benefit in terms of the long-term sustainability of that. And so having government land banks in collaboration with emerging farmland trusts. Just one last finishing quote on the note of land trusts. So this is from Maura Quayle, who was the Dean of the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. And in a report to the Ministry of Agriculture, she articulated, which I hope I emphasize in this presentation, that preservation and isolation will not be enough, for one. And then one of her recommendations was establish a BC Lands Trust with an umbrella trust for agriculture so that a percentage of the billions of dollars of intergenerational wealth in the province can be put to good use as citizens are encouraged to donate their land or their cash assets to the trust. So this was in 1998. So again, I just want to point out that many of these ideas aren't new. There's lots of excellent ideas and recommendations that have been made. It's just an issue of sort of recognizing those and being able to collaborate and find means to put them into action. And so, thank you so much for listening. And people have some questions or comments or suggestions, or we are open the floor to people here and people on our webinar.
Thanks, Dennis. So just to test our technology here, could one of you on the webinar, maybe Mark or Jillian, just say hi so we can see if we can hear you?
Oh, with voice? Can you hear me?
Sure, yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry, I just typed it.
We had muted you, and so I just wanted to make sure we have you back online.
Okay.
So I'll moderate the discussion here, and I think maybe what we'll do is go back and forth between a web participant and an in-house participant, and I'd like to actually start with the web participant since they've been so patiently waiting. So if someone wants to jump in with a comment or a question, and make sure just to identify yourself with your name and your organization or where you are in the province would help us to sort of put a face to the voice.
Mary Alice Johnson here. Can you hear me?
We can.
I have a farm in Souk and have been active with the soil apprenticeship program, and we have a Souk Farmland Trust that we've just started up, and we're sort of taking my farm on as a sort of a challenge to see how my farm can be transferred. But as you were talking, it seemed like one point I'd like to emphasize that's happened on my farm. And as I look around at older farmers around me who are having problems with succession or with finding a way to transfer their lands, it takes time to build trust between the landowner, who might be the farmer, and the group of people who would be likely to take over. That the soil internship or apprenticeship is a good start, but we're finding something needs to be done there to work out that building of trust between the farmer who is mentoring the people who are working with the farmer. 10, 11 years ago, a young one, Marika, came to my program through the soil program, and over the 10 years, we've developed a partnership with the business, and now I think it takes that long to build that kind of trust, the expectation that a person's just going to be able to access a farmer's land without, with any kind of any tenure, when the farmer has no sense of just how serious and capable the young person is, the new farmer. So I think there seems to be a need there in fostering that whole relationship. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Yeah, that's a great point, and that a lot, like in terms of the relationship building, that is something that is really challenging to sort of institutionally provide. But I think that is in terms of developing those long-term relationships, and also making both parties aware of the needs and that it takes time to build that, and especially with young farmers who are just eager to get going. But emphasizing that building the relationship with the people you're working with on the land over time, it takes time and work. And yeah, thank you, Mary Alice.
Great. Maybe one of our in-house participants. Questions or comments? Andrew. Andrew Reisman from UBC.
I'm curious about the scaling and profitability dimensions to this situation. And if the goal is to have viability ultimately for these new farmers, or to create an atmosphere that allows for viability, how does that change? How does that atmosphere change depending if they're on a micro farm in some urban setting versus some small to mid-size operation, 20 acres? And then how do we factor in what a successful operation is besides what profitability would say? And whether that's any considerations, and whether there's a place for principal component analysis or something to look at these different dimensions and understand the composite of criteria that need to be in place that promotes success.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure where the question is.
Well, I think, yeah, I can call them. I mean, well, for the micro farm versus mid-size, it's so variable, but you get farms who, like Green City Acres, or there's just a speaker from Quebec who is here, who can make, on these micro farms on very, very small acreages, make more money than your average farmer in BC is making on 20 acres. So, and whether that's a replicable model, but I think that, yeah, the profitability is very different in terms of the type of land access you have, and there is potential on very small farms to be able to be. It's kind of, yeah, the land question is interesting in terms of, I think one person, people say to get bigger and bigger, and they say that's the bigger they got, the less profitable they got.
So it's like a U-shaped curve. Potentially.
Yeah.
I think it's just really diverse. I mean, you have the business model, which is variably profitable depending on what the business model is and what the production model is. And the land price is then a separate piece of that. Certain production practices require more land, and that often costs more. So often I think people are moving towards these small lot production models because they can access the land for that in a way that they can't access 50 to 100 acres for a dairy farm.
So we have any, just one follow-up?
Yeah.
So we have any sense of the difference in opinions amongst the farmers on what is successful versus what is profitable? Are they equating these two things, or will they accept lower profitability and consider themselves successful for their livelihood or quality of life or some other aspect?
Not measurable. I don't have, in terms of, I definitely didn't ask farmers what they define as success in the survey.
Yeah.
In terms of interviews, I think it'll come out more, and I haven't done the full analysis of all my interview data.
We've done some of that. I mean, I can even just speak out of context here. We've done this exact question in our Brazil work, where we're asking farmers using these shared and alternative land access models, what they constitute as success. And so they sort of say a level of income, which is in Brazil is about double the minimum wage, is what they consider adequate income. They add on to that the food they produce on the farm that they're eating. They add on to that their housing and place to live. So, a double the minimum wage plus housing plus food actually amounts to a reasonable lifestyle in Brazil. I've found in the conversations I've had with alternative sort of forms of farmers in BC is people don't feel like they're successful. They feel like they might be achieving a lifestyle situation, but they often struggle to work off farm in the winter, to work an extra job consulting. They find that I've often have quotes like, I have to work to support my farming habit in these kind of alternative models. And I don't think that that's sustainable. So I think a lot more work needs to be done on this economic viability piece, because otherwise what you see is people burning out. They farm for 5 years in these really unstable arrangements. They don't have a long-term secure lease. They can't really afford to invest in the capital costs of scaling up their business or scaling out their business, so because of working on the side and all these things. So I think that's really the next piece. Once the land access is secure, then how do you build a sustainable economic enterprise on top of that? Trying to tease apart those two really important thorny issues, I think, in this area. So somebody from the webinar.
Sarah Dent.
Sarah Dent. Hi, Sarah. Sarah Dent from the Young Agrarians.
Hi.
Great review, Dennis. Great work. I've got little heart palpitations because I'm so excited about what you guys are saying, even though it's a little bit dismal too at the same time. So yeah, I'm over on Bowen Island. I just got back from the Rockstar Farmer tour with Jean-Martin Fortier. And we had about 450 people come out to hear him speak and workshop on his, 1.5 acre, 140,000 per year, 45% profit margin operation in Quebec. And a couple things came out of that as we were going through the workshop. One, they've got $7 a day daycare in Quebec. And two, he was able to purchase his land, his 10 acres, for something like $100,000. So my question for you, Dennis, is based on doing all of this work, are there 1 to 2 major things that you think that we could get behind as a group of nonprofits and organizations, businesses, etc., that would affect kind of positive land tenure down the road? Like, are there 1 to 2 major things? Like what I think of is, what if we could get some of the ALR out of speculative land valuation, and we could have multiple owners and multiple houses on ALR, allowing for collective mortgaging structures that would allow for that long-term ownership and joint investment into a business operation. But that's just based on, what my, not really research, but just sort of the last couple of years of work in this new farmer startup world. And so I'm curious if you've got a couple things that really extra stand out for you that you think maybe we could all sort of garner our energy around.
Pressure.
I just have to say, the list of recommendations yesterday was much longer. So
Hannah tailored this down
quite a bit.
That's a great question, Sarah. And I think, as I've been going through, I had a long list of recommendations that need to be tailored into the answer to your question, because I think that's what we need, is the 1 to 2 tangible, most important things that we can approach. I'm sort of hesitant to answer that right this second, and as I'm for everybody, this is the sort of first major presentation I've done with the results, and I'm going to write it up in a report format to share with everybody and all the networks that have participated, and we'll have a more distilled and articulate section on the recommendations. And
the results of the conversations that we've been having around the province, not just us, but with the BC Food Systems Network, with Community Farms Program, is there's quite a bit of demand around the province for a provincial trust.
Yeah.
I mean, going back 15 years, TLC fulfilled that role for a short period of time. Its mandate was not farmland protection. It failed for reasons that don't necessarily have to do with farmland. So there's a lot of interest in actually trying to build a provincial public farmland trust. So there's people who are willing to donate their farms. There are municipal and public land, that land is farmland, that if it can be maintained in a provincial trust, it can be leased out. So I think there's a lot of interest in that. It's something that municipal governments can get their head around because some of them own farmland already, and it's just a matter of how do you actually facilitate the management of that land so that it's not a burden to the municipalities, but rather an asset. So I think that's a really tangible thing that I think a number of organizations around the province are interested in and could work on together.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think in the agricultural covenants as well, I think there's interest in it, and you can look elsewhere where it is being widely used, and it can have the impact of reducing or ideally preventing land speculation and reducing the land values back down to agricultural values.
Right. So tax policy and affirmative agricultural covenant. So those are something that goes on the title to the land such that if it's not actively farmed, then there's some kind of consequence. So either a higher rent, or you lose your access to it, or you pay just one tax rate. We have that a little bit with farm tax status, but it's not high enough differential to it's not a high enough incentive to get landowners who aren't currently farming, but that land, especially if it's being used as a rural estate. Lots of little things like that. Fiscal policy, tax policy, and then a provincial farmland trust, I think would be my top recommendation.
Yes, and I think, and Sarah I don't know if you clarified if you were looking for nonprofit, but I would say that in terms of what Hannah said, I think we need to collaborate. The nonprofits need to collaborate with government and institutional mechanisms in order to enable the impact that we want to see. The nonprofits need to continue doing the amazing work that they are doing to support farmers, but I think there's, in terms of these big issues like land speculation and land and farmland trust, I think there's a real need to have some institutional support in order to have longevity and stability and appropriate resources for that to happen.
All right, so a question from the table, Brent, and then
kind of related to the provincial farmland trust, and I'm kind of wrapping my head around it. I think what comes up to me kind of strategically in terms of developing models and advocating for good public policy is how, in moving forward with this idea, do we not replicate, in some ways, what food banks have been to food and income insecurity? How can we not replicate that with farmland trust being to public policy on farmland protection? If you get what I'm saying, kind of like we've seen food banks just as a parallel come in and advocate state responsibility and withdraw the state from caring for, right? So how do we make sure, and I think we're touching on it, we just wanted to tease that out a little bit so that we don't do the same thing where we can actually in some ways see government who at this point seems quite open to, removing public policy around farmland protection, see farmland trust as a way to be like, great, charitable sector and financing, you guys will take care of it, and then we don't have to deal with it. I think it's something we're going to need to, with all the people around the table and others, walk into with eyes wide open as that relationship with government comes. So thoughts on that? I'm curious to know others' perspectives on the phone and
Yeah.
we're gonna have a response from Teresa here.
Yeah, hi, Teresa from Metro Vancouver. This question about whether putting farmland in public ownership is the best way, that's come up.
Yeah.
Some of the people. I think if a farmland trust takes on more of a wider role in terms of, like, one question I had was about the land linking. What type of, how much urgency is there amongst farmers to have that kind of service? Farms started in Ontario. Is it carrying over here in British Columbia? Is there a real need for that kind of role? So if a farmland trust took on other things aside land ownership, not make land ownership in a trust form be the answer, it may be a good piece.
Kind of like the ALC has a broader mandate that they actually aren't able to.
Yeah,
maybe start in one place.
Yes.
And move. Like land linking is a really good way to connect with landowners, farmers who are retired, who have nobody to pass on their farm to. Start to build that relationship.
And that's happening. I think a lot of the networks like the Community Futures, the Farm Folk City Folk, are doing, young agrarians are doing lots of land linking work. So the question is, how do you scale that up and out and have a provincial land base that can actually be linked to? So, yeah. I mean, the American Farmland Trust, for example, does a lot of things. It holds some land, it holds a lot of agricultural covenants, it does a lot of education, does a lot of land linking, provides training and support for organizations or individuals who want to get into shared land relationships. So the model that I've been hearing the most about and that people seem to be very responsive is this broader model that you're talking about. It doesn't just hold the land, but it also has an entity that facilitates that land being put into production.
Then what's the relationship between that body and government responsibility? You know what I mean? Like, to me, that could still then be, then this is now a charitably funded, you know, super labor intensive mechanism that we can actually see state involvement, public policy for public good withdraw from. I don't know, to me, there's still that tension of need to do it and strategy, but how do we do that in
I think that
current...
if the land, one option is that the land remains public.
Yeah.
So you have the public land, so it is in the public interest. It is public good. It is not owned by a nonprofit society.
Yeah. Okay.
A nonprofit society or an agency may manage that land, right? So Halliburton is a good example there, where that land is owned by the municipality of Saanich. It has an access agreement with the Halliburton Society, who in effect leases the land on a long-term basis. I think 99 years. From maybe Mary Alice can correct me if I'm wrong. From Saanich, and then does the land linking, does the education, does the outreach, manages the day-to-day operations. So Saanich doesn't have to actually bother with that, but it knows that the lease is written such that if Halliburton folds, then it's still public land.
Yeah.
And it can be leased into another nonprofit with a similar mandate.
Mary Alice here again.
Hi, Mary Alice.
It seems like one key is that community involvement. I watched Halliburton go together, and the reason why it did is that it had a community behind it. And I think the same is true with Madrona Farm, many of the farms. So I think rather than having a BC, you know, a province-wide organization that is supposed to take care of this, I think having it is an umbrella of various community organizations that are working at the community level, that works farm by farm by farm. I mean, we know here in our area of a number of farms that are needing some support in transition, in acquisition, in succession, all of those. I mean, I've had three groups come to me in the last few weeks who are looking for land to purchase or to lease, and then I also know of 3 or 4 farmers who are concerned about their farms. So at the community level, people know what's going on, and also communities will support much more strongly a farm that's within their site. So I think having the building the community strength land trust might be a way to go.
Yeah, maybe I can just comment also on Brent's comment and back to that.
Yeah.
That's when I want to make it clear that we in doing this work we support the ALR for that, partially for that reason, because we don't want government to say, oh well, there's we're going to have a farmland trust being developed, so we can use that as a reason to reduce the impact of the ALR and the ALC or the power of it. So making that really clear that these models are meant to be supportive.
Complementary. Yeah.
Complementary to the ALR, that's the word, yeah. So I want to make that very clear, especially at this moment in time, and you aren't the first person to raise that concern, that as we develop this, especially at this critical moment with the politics around the ALR and ALC, that we need to make it very clear that this isn't meant to be a replacement for the ALR, it's meant to be in complementing collaboration with government ALR. And then back to Mary Alice's point about with the Farmland Trust. Thanks for raising that again. So that was raised by many of the people we spoke with. We had sort of a visioning session about farmland trusts, and I think that's and if it were a provincial trust, the idea would be to have sort of this umbrella, larger institutional organization that could then support the smaller communities who are struggling to move their projects forward. And then the management would still be held by the community in terms of managing and around the actual piece of land. It would be those who are using it, and the community is benefiting from it, not the provincial trust. So it's sort of like an umbrella that would collaborate with other organizations, farms, etc.
We just have 5 minutes left, so maybe we'll take one more question from the webinar, from the web people, and then the last one from our in-house participants. So anybody on the web that has a question to close us out or comment? So that, yeah, just go ahead and introduce yourself. Sure, we're videoing it here too, so that's a good backup. If you send us the link, then we can also post this one too, and we'll see which one looks better. Yeah. But thanks for that offer. That's great. I know we had been told we could take up to 50 webinar participants, but it turned out it was 25. So I think there's quite a few people that will want to see the video.
Yeah, but yeah, you're welcome to share, but we'll also so let's be in touch.
So, yeah, great. So, question from the table?
Sure, I have one actually. I've actually always been looking at it from the other side of looking at it from the supply side, sorry, like the distribution side. So saying it's hard to actually get this local food into the house. And I was surprised to see that profitability ranked 9th out of all of the determinative of all of the concerns people had. But I was wondering, do you think that's a reflection more of people not being farmers, like active farmers? Because certainly the majority of your sample was not active farming. So is that just kind of a romantic idea that the immediate barrier is land and the future barrier will probably be income?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Unless you have the land, can you worry about? I don't know.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, if that's something that you were to actually just use like a sample of people who were actively farming, does it change?
It actually does, and so that the list that I showed you was just the prospective respondents for simplicity's sake of overwhelmingly large lists. And that is a very good point, that profitability was quite low. And so with the sample that I had of people who are actually farming in the beginning, young farmer sample, the list was relatively similar, but that was one of the differences, is that profitability was ranked as higher up in the list as a barrier. So thank you for pointing that out. For time, and it is. There was 34 answers for the current farmers, so a little bit less, but in terms of what was considered to be a barrier, it was the same top two, the access to capital and cost of land. But then profitability was higher up in the list, and I think I noticed that too, because and it's raised by a lot of people I talk to, and I talk about land. They're like, well, why aren't you talking about profitability? Because that's the real issue. So I tried to sort of make that connection. Hasn't been the main focus, but like as Hannah said, and as you said, and as many other people, it needs to be an integrated focus in anything. Is the profitability on the land.
For sure. And I mean, it's linked in the sense that you're not carrying debt on your land or servicing that debt necessarily. You're not included in
yeah.
I also noticed that only 91% of current farmers hope to own land, whereas 100% of prospective do, which I also thought was kind of a funny example of like 10% have gotten in and be like, never mind, I actually don't.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thanks to everyone for your participation. Definitely do stay in touch. We'll be sending out the reports from this research as it evolves, and we will be available to the slides and to the video. So
yeah, and you all have my email from the invite. So if you have any comments or questions that you didn't get to share, please feel free to send me an email.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.